So I want to start off by apologizing for the audio quality of this recording, but we got to work with the tools that we have when we have the opportunity to work, right? Um, Everybody who's not on the left is against the left, and I've made that argument before, and I really believe it. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about social democracy. Social democracy, the Social Democrats, are socialists. They're leftists. But they differ from the more hardcore people on the left because they don't think that revolution is the way to bring about socialism. They might think that violence is bad or whatever, but that's the only thing that's keeping them from doing all the bad things that the socialists and communists do. They have the same goals in mind, which is that they want to grind everybody down to the lowest common denominator. And ultimately, a social democratic regime will probably carry out assassinations and repression and all other kind of stuff if they need to, if they think that it's necessary, if they think that it's warranted. They just don't want to rise up as a revolutionary group and overthrow government. So the way that everybody else can fight effectively against the left is basically to explain to the centrist and to the undecided people what socialism really is. Most people are not socialists. They do not have the type of psychology that's conducive to socialism. They're not going to believe in the doctrine. They probably wouldn't want it anyway. So I think that basically all we have to do is fairly and legitimately portray what socialism and the left and the social democrats and all the different flavors are. Just put it out there. Don't sugarcoat it, which is what they do. They go and they try to sell somebody the welfare state and say, look, we're going to take care of the sick people, we're going to take care of the orphans, we're going to take care of the old people, and then before you know it, you've got all the other stuff that we know goes with socialism. So what you have to do is not read books by Julius Evola or Nietzsche or Schopenhauer, I don't know. All that stuff is good, but it's not going to tell you how to fight socialism. It's not going to tell you how to get rid of social democracy. What we've got to do is we've got to go read important academic books by social democrats about socialism, about social democracy, and about the welfare state. And this is a big book in social science. This is something that you would be given in graduate school for your seminars in economics, sociology, political science, anything that's going to have to deal with this topic. This book, I think, is from the 80s, 1990. It's from 1990, and it's been a big hit ever since it came out. I don't know how to pronounce this first name. I think it's Gusta Esping Anderson. He comes up with a three-type typology of the modern Western welfare state. One is the Anglo model, the Anglo-British model, which is like, you know, the USA, Canada, Britain. It's the Anglosphere. Britain basically is the main one. And that one is typified by the liberal tradition, like the free trade, laissez-faire kind of tradition. Another one is the continental European corporatist model. So that's the main one for the body of Europe, and then the other one, the third one, is the Scandinavian model. The Central European one is the conservative one that has a lot of the trade union stuff. The Scandinavian one is the most socialist through the means of social democracy, and then the Anglosphere, the Anglo-British model, is the most laissez-faire. But they all share different traits, and this book has a lot of really good historical information, but it's all terribly slanted towards the social democrats and towards the socialist system in general. So what you've got to do is you got to bone up on your history so that you know when these people are pulling the wool over your eyes, and then you got to read this book critically. And then when you do that, what you'll understand is the key points in socialism that really jump out at you, and those are the things that you can use to try to argue to normal people. One of the most important concepts that you can get out of this book, or at least that I can get out of it, is decommodification. And where are my notes? Have I lost my notes? Oh my God, really? I've lost all the notes I've taken. Give me just a second. Okay, So I found my notes, so now we can move forward. So basically, decommodification is what the socialists are trying to achieve. What is commodification? Before we can talk about decommodifying something, we've got to talk about commodifying it. So this author has the idea that before the capitalist world was in place, people's labor was not involved in the money system. So what people would do is that you would work for your feudal lord or whoever it was, and they would take care of you. So your labor, like the amount of stuff that you produced, was not directly tied to the likelihood of you surviving. I mean, I'm already getting into problems, and you probably are too if you're watching this video, but this is kind of the idea. In our society, in capitalist societies, certain jobs are more high paying. The more productive you are, the more money you make generally, right? So people who are less productive get less money, and if we're all equal human beings, we all have an equal right to survive. People with a low productivity are going to die, right? They're going to starve to death if we don't have the welfare state. So he says that in pre-capitalist society, labor wasn't commodified. You weren't paid on your labor. You were paid as a human being, and you weren't paid in anything. You were just, given stuff. So then the capitalist system came in, and people were reduced to units of labor, basically. Like a person was now basically the same as a sack of wheat instead of being a child of God, and those people are interchangeable. If these people over here aren't doing what we want, we'll just bring in some more. Okay, and what the socialists want to do is they want to decommodify labor. Not that they want to return to the previous system, but they want to get to a situation in which all people are basically paid the same regardless of what they do. And if that sounds outlandish, everybody being paid the same regardless of what they do, let's see if we can find it here. Decommodifying, well, let's see. A minimal definition must entail that citizens can freely and without potential loss of job, income, or general welfare opt out of work when they themselves consider it necessary. So you've heard it here. When you yourself consider it necessary as the worker, you opt out of work, and he goes on in many other places to say that you're paid the same as people who are working. Now, if that sounds like a straw man of socialism, we got it right here. We got it from a very successful and famous academic who's a scholar of social democracy, and I'm sure he's a social democrat himself. So it's all right here. What else have we got? The market. This is talking about why do we need to decommodify stuff? Why can't we just live in this market world that we're currently inhabiting? He says that the market is a freedom behind prison walls because labor can't withhold itself from work or it'll starve. So you can't just decide that you're going to stop working or else you'll die. Therefore, the market is still a prison. Now, I find that kind of strange because in the pre-commodified world, the early modern period, the medieval times, whatever else, if you stop working there, you're going to starve. And if you're not going to starve, you're going to be beaten by whoever's in charge of you, all the way up the ladder. So it's never really been true in human history that people could stop working and then they wouldn't starve. So to suggest that this is kind of like a bad thing that's come about just due to the market and laissez-faire, I find that kind of strange. And then he says, in comparison to laissez-faire, poor relief, so we're talking about starting, we'll say, I don't know, 1760s and forward, something like that in Britain, let's imagine, in comparison to the poor relief that you would get in 1820 or something in Britain. Social aid back earlier in the early modern period and the medieval period, he says, was generous and benign. Now, it may be true that they were more generous with what they had, but the overall level of wealth was way lower. There was less stuff around. So they spread it around more equally, but there was less stuff overall. So you would probably be more likely to survive in the 1820s in Britain on poor relief than in a lot of other situations in the early modern period and the medieval period in which people were still helping you out more. So that is just swept off the table. It's not interesting. He tells a pretty cool story about a textile plant in Haiti, in which some entrepreneurs in the United States look over at Haiti and they see that they've got very low wages. So they say, let's go put in a plant. We'll make clothes in Haiti, and it'll be really cheap because the wages are very low. So they go, they build the plant, they recruit the best workers they can find, but they have to shut down operations in about 6 months. Why do they have to do that? It's because the cultural traditions in Haiti are such that people are comfortable with being paid a very low wage, but they also expect their boss to pay for their weddings, their funerals. If their child gets sick, then they want a loan or just money from their boss to take care of all this other stuff. So the entrepreneurs, the capitalists, had screwed themselves because they thought that the amount of wages was the total cost of doing business there, and it wasn't. There was all this like corruption and patronage, basically, that's characteristic of pre-modern societies and less developed civilizations. So the author here is saying that that is a less commodified form of labor. And I just don't get that either. To me, it just seems like that's part of the cost of doing business, and you can call it something else, but it's basically still kind of like wages that you're paying. They're just unpredictable rather than, like that. And, we could speculate on why the Haitians might prefer for big events to be taken care of rather than being paid all that money in terms of wages and saving it themselves for those events. We won't get into that, but we could speculate on it, right? Also here, he's got an interesting concept that he calls the residual welfare state that I think Titmus, somebody like that I don't know, was talking about. And he says that this is, it's a bad idea, it's not going to work. But it's basically what Jeremy Bentham was proposing, which is you let the market, and the liberals, you let the market take care of basically 90% of society, and the other 10% that fall through the cracks, or 5% or 2% or whatever it happens to be, the welfare state takes care of them. That is the kind of welfare state that I like, that I think would be appropriate. The people who've got no family, the people who are probably of such poor character or something that they don't have any friends who will help take care of them, the people who are just the complete social outcasts. They've always been there, they're always going to be there, and we probably ought to pass around the collection plate to help take care of those people. I'm not opposed to that. But what the socialists, both of the social democrat and the national socialist variety, on the left, on the right, wherever they end up, they all believe in spreading this social protection, the safety net, over the entire society and decommodifying labor. Okay, so to wrap up, this guy's got a very hazy idea of the pre-industrial world, in which, let's say that we've got I took a note in here about it. I'm sorry, I hate to do this. I hate to do this to you. Okay, so it's got a quote here that says, to socialism, the commodification of labor is an integral element in the process of alienation and class. It is the condition under which workers abandon control over their work in return for wages. The condition under which workers abandon control over their work in return for wages. And I just have to ask you, so if we go back in time, to the early modern period or the medieval period, and labor is no longer commodified, and we've got, let's say, three basic types of people. Let's say we've got serfs, we've got soldiers, and we've got some sort of skilled person, like maybe a parish priest or something like that. What control over their work does a serf, a soldier, or a parish priest have? They've got none. They have absolutely no control over their work. Serfs are tied to their land, or they're tied to a manor. They're tied to something. They can't just go off and do what they want. A soldier can't just quit. They have an obligation to serve, and a parish priest doesn't have has very little authority, especially in earlier times. So these guys, they're Marxists, right? And Marx was writing about workers. He was writing about industrial people. Later on, they developed like the agricultural versions of Marxism, but it's just not here. So to premise your theory on this idea of how workers change over time, how their labor becomes commodified, and how we need to decommodify it with this huge welfare state, it's very strange and ahistorical to me. But there's a lot more interesting ideas in here. I guess I got stuck on the decommodification aspect. But if you found this interesting, or if you have any comments, let me know, and maybe we'll do some more. Thank you for your time.